predict with Magnus. I mean, I was like, I don't know. Basically, I have no idea. There you go. How can you predict that? I mean, you'd have to be Nostradamus Mark II to get that one right. I mean, D3, a really strange move.
So he's opened with C3, now D3.
E3 next, maybe?
E3 is going to be next.
He's played B3, C3, D3, E3, F3, G3 on the tour just this season.
I remember talking to Vidit when he was playing in the Men's World Champions Chess Tour before, and how much he respects Magnus Carlsen, how much he's meant to him, being just 4 years younger, trying to, with the whole background of Anand. And then he comes out and he throws D3 at you after you probably prepared quite a lot. What does that do to you?
Yeah, it throws you off. And imagine Vidit has spent nearly 1 minute thinking of his reply on move 1. It's definitely psychologically, it's not easy to bounce back. And Vidit, he'll need to just play quickly, just trust his instincts, occupy the centre, follow the general opening rules. But when you're playing the world champion, when you know that he's kind of freestyling, when he's kind of just throwing these weird, wacky ideas against you, it is hard. And, OK, we've transposed into a Sicilian, and you're happy there, Simon?
I'm happy about this because it's a chessable course. Is it? Yes, it is. Brilliant. I love it. So,
one of yours, Simon.
It is.
This is the Grand Prix, isn't it?
It's kind of a Grand Prix, yeah. This actually came out as a course that myself and Richard Palliser did for Chessable. Richard's a very strong international master, brilliant player and a brilliant theoretician. But this was called the British Grand Prix because a lot of British players were playing this particular setup that White goes for. And it's getting out of theory, so it's doing the kind of thing that I think Magnus likes doing. You're not into any real deep theory, and you can get often very good attacking chances. Luke McShane won a fantastic game in this against Cheparinov, going back to, I think, 2009. 2009
I can remember.
Serbia.
It was in the European Team Championships, and it was
indeed.
kind of a group.
The funny story about this, why it was called the British Grand Prix, and there's some other players who could be named after as well, was that we're basically sitting around the restaurant having some wine, discussing some ideas, and it was Stuart Conquest, it was myself, it was Luke McShane, Mickey Adams, and Stephen Gordon, and we were just thinking, why don't you put the bishop on this square that Magnus put it to in the Grand Prix, getting like a reversed good Dutch opening, because in the normal Grand Prix, you put the bishop on the other side of the pawns, but it gets kicked around a lot. And with this simple move, we're thinking, OK, this is actually very, very interesting. You can castle, you can swing the white queen. Maybe David can put some little arrows on the board, swing the white queen over towards the king side if you want to. And it's like, OK, and we thought, yeah, this is really interesting. It avoids a lot of theory. You get a position, these two pawns in the middle. They're very, very nice as well. And, and then basically Luke won this incredible game in 20 moves of it. So I'm obviously excited to see it because it was one of the most recent courses that I made, and it's an opening I've played quite a lot myself as well.
Yeah, the whole idea is that if Black does attack at some point,
Here he comes.
Yeah,
Here
exactly.
he comes.
If Black does castle, then you can attack him. You throw pawns forward, you bring your bishop out, and I mean, you're basically a fortune teller, Simon, because the white queen has indeed slid across one square. Yes. She's heading for this square. Now the H4 square.
I'm excited about this.
You know, if the queen slides out there...
Does he learn that from his Chessable course, by the way?
It's all in the Chessable course.
Yeah,
and I've had this position myself. Luke had this position against Cheparinov,
I was going to say.
2009. And the reason I love this position is you can be an absolute lunatic. And I'd love to see Magnus be a lunatic and just throw everything at the black king. I mean, David, again, you can show the ideas here where the queen might go. It's a very simple pattern here. Let's say Black does nothing. The queen comes over to this square, getting nearer the black king. Let's say Black does some stuff on the queen side. And now a lovely move here. You push the f-pawn, and then let's say Black keeps doing stuff on the queen side. Now the bishop flies in, getting rid of a defender of the black king. Black continues ignoring it, probably not very wise. And now the white knight comes into the position, and you already have some very, very dangerous threats here. Maybe even a winning position for White
this
already.
happens now, Simon.
Oh, well, if this happens, I'll be by the course, the British Grand Prix. It's on Chessable. It's a blooming good course, and there's a free 1 hour version.
Yeah, look at this pawn chain. It's also White going to try and crash through on this square. For example, if Black continues, then you do have ideas of trading. And yes, the black knight covers the square, but you can remove this black knight by capturing a pawn, sacrificing, attacking, and yeah, it's all about the black king. In the current position, it's Magnus to play. OK, he brings his knight out first. Slightly surprising he didn't rush to bring his queen into the attack. This one logical as well. The white knight on the decent square, more centralised. And yeah, let's watch out for the black king. Will it come under fire with those ideas that Simon highlighted?
I have one question about this. Very often, people have referred to Magnus Carlsen as being extremely calculated, at least some points of his career, how he plays like a computer, he plays the computer moves. Does he have the mania required to play this position, and does he have that maniac side in him?
That's an interesting question, because he is, I would say, a very mature player, as in he doesn't normally like throwing all his eggs into one basket. He's not an all-in player by any means when he plays. So I don't know if he's going to throw everything towards the black king. And you can see here the manoeuvre that he's done is another very normal manoeuvre. But Vidit's last move, I think, is very wise, because you want to swap off that white knight, which we saw can be a very powerful attacking piece. So I expect he won't go for that all-in approach. He'll take it a little bit more calm. But I still like white's position because of his 2 pawns there over on the king's side in the middle.
I think Magnus does have that in his locker, the kind of mania side, the kind of pure all-out attacker. But the thing is, he doesn't need to use it that often. Normally, he can simply grind players down smoothly without taking any risk at all. But maybe in a situation now where he's pretty confident he's going to qualify for the knockouts, he might start to take risks. He might start to kind of play for the crowd, play for the beauty prize, as we say in chess. And yeah, Simon, I'm still watching out for that attacking idea coming on the board. As you've said, black is doing a good job. Black's knight in the centre of the board now, a strong piece. He can trade a set of knights if necessary. But, for example, if the black knight in the middle of the board takes the white knight now, that only helps white. White's rook might lift up the board and swing across later. Yeah, plenty of ideas. And Vidit clearly is outside of his comfort zone. And normally, in terms of openings, that's the only thing you can hope for these days.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I think this is a very good way to play against the Sicilian in general is that, you know, it's the same kind of patterns. You just learn some certain patterns. You don't have to memorise so much theory, and it takes your opponent into positions that they're not comfortable with. And you can see, as you say, Vidit here, maybe not as comfortable in such a position with the black pieces. I mean, I think what black generally should be doing here is try to make some exchanges of those dangerous pieces, and then start the queenside play. This move here, just moving the bishop once, it's a very slow move, that one. I mean, that is... I really love to see Magnus go into turbo drive now. Will he swing the queen over? Would he even play a pawn sacrifice? Here it comes. Here it comes.
It's starting.
So it's coming.
And yeah, I can tell you that white has an incredible score here. You know, it just looks so dangerous.
No surprise.
It isn't any surprise. But I was a little bit nervous because for a long time, I could just see that in the database there was a Jay Hausker playing this position with the black pieces. But it was not me, I hasten to say. There's another Jay Hausker. It's Yuri. Yeah, okay. And yeah, he's from the Czech Republic, so hello. And yeah, it's very good because having a name doppelganger, because when people try to search you up on the database, they get their game, this person's games as well.
I was thinking one year, I was trying to... The British Championships, Mickey Adams was the top seed, and I thought maybe we could get the top 10 players to all change their name by D-poll to Mickey Adams, just to confuse the arbiters. So you'd have Mickey Adams versus Mickey Adams, Mickey Adams versus Mickey Adams, and it would get all the preparation. No one would know who they're playing. And then you change it back afterwards. It's a really stupid idea.
Isn't it quite expensive, though, to change?
It's just a stupid idea, but it sounded quite funny to do. But yeah, no, it's a stupid idea.
I have known a few players who've done that just so that they wouldn't be findable in the databases.
Oh, really?
So it's not possible to find their names. And I know when I was young, a lot of the top Chinese players, you know, they would maybe different spellings every tournament. And OK, meanwhile, the black bishop has jumped out, but that's the second time in a row that black bishop has just moved. Surprising. A loss of time for Vidit. It shows that he's clearly uncomfortable with the kind of incoming attack. But losing a move, losing an important tempo in a position like this where the attack is about to happen, it's not that logical. So, OK, he wants to get rid of this white knight. You're the expert here, Simon. What do you think? Should white just kind of sit before kind of going all out for the attack, or should white maybe build up for it? Is now the moment to go forward with some pawns?
Yeah. I mean, Yeah, I mean, I think in general, Black's plan, this idea of putting the knight in the centre and the bishop over there is one of Black's best plans because he wants to exchange off the pieces. I mean, Magnus's moving the queenside knight out is not that normal because you want to be able to push a pawn to the square where the white knight is. This is one of the key ideas of this system. You put a pawn on this square, which should be a lovely move if Magnus could play that now. So I'm not sure the knight really wants to be there, but yeah, why not push the pawn here? I mean, and go for it. The only issue with that is, as David should show, if Black now plays bishop takes knight, you kind of have to do this strange thing, I think, and probably take your pawn. I say probably. You could, yeah, this is a little bit weird, this position.
If you take with your bishop, I guess the downside is that this pawn might drop off. You no longer protect this pawn and your rook is under fire. We actually saw something very similar to this position yesterday in a game between Gawain Jones and Pragnananda. But meanwhile, Magnus didn't choose to launch pawns forward and go all out for the attack yet. First, he traded a set of knights. And after this recapture, White can actually take this black bishop off the board, but it does come at the cost of your own knight. And here, after, for example, pawn takes knight, you can't really get greedy as White. You can't win a pawn at the moment because after more trades, firstly, you will never get an attack if pieces come off the board. But secondly, the black bishop can restore the balance. Maybe even some stronger moves there for Black in the process. Magnus decided no more exchanges. And in the current position, instead of taking this bishop, as we just showed, he dropped his knight back. Temporarily, at least, I don't like White's minor pieces. These pieces are kind of clumsy in the way. But temporarily, maybe some ideas of going after this pawn in the centre of the board. And Black doesn't have any kind of necessarily aggressive, active ideas of his own. So if White does get given the time, still this idea will be on the board.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why bringing the white knight out, as Magnus done. I mean, it is not the way you normally play the position, at least, because I might even want the white knight back on its starting square in a lot of structures. And you can see, yeah, and Vidit here now creating counterplay on the c-file. And I would actually say that Vidit's probably done a good job here of stopping any dangerous attack, at least.
Oh, and Magnus is the one retreating. That's not a good sign for the world champion. Suddenly things are turning in Black's favour, and I think you're right, Simon. He should have bought your Chessable course. He should have been watching because this white knight is in the way. And
I mean, he kind of owns Chessable. He should kind of watch your course if he's going to play the opening, you know. So he's only got himself to blame, hasn't he? So,
yeah, but I have to say, you know, I still think the position isn't that easy for Vidit. I don't think Vidit has necessarily fully equalised because there's still questions to answer. How are you going to defend the pawn?
I mean, I would just snap this knight off. Without thinking too much, maybe now White's queen has to take. The white bishop has to stay defending this pawn. And now, I mean, the knight can reroute. Black's queen can come out.
It's very hard to attack for White without that. This is such a key idea that Black's done here to get rid of that white knight on the king's side. That white knight can be so dangerous. I mean, you can, of course, do this rook swinging idea in a lot of cases in that last line that David showed, but you haven't got many pieces now to attack, and I think it'll be more slower sort of play here.
Yeah, so Magnus not going for the all-out checkmate. Disappointing, but still a very rich position in store. And okay, in the current position, he didn't take off White's knight. I'm slightly surprised he brought his queen out instead. So I don't think White should get greedy and snap off this pawn. For example, if you take this pawn with your knight right now, then there will be tactics such as knight takes pawn, attacking the white queen, but more importantly, unleashing this bishop. And for example, after a trade here, Black actually wins the white queen due to a pin. So White still has to be very careful. Don't be greedy, don't be hasty. Magnus just forcing, actually, this trade, bishop for knight. It's going to be a long manoeuvring game ahead.
Yeah, certainly. And whilst Vidit is contemplating whether to capture that knight or not, I suspect he will do it, as David mentioned. Well, we have our quiz of the day where we're asking a very simple question: what is your chess level? And you all at home are giving us creative answers, and bishop takes knight on the board. And I really do have to say I like Chamakapu's answer, who says that their chess level is, relatively speaking, like a boxer who throws all the punches in the first round, i.e. the opening, then spends the rest of the rounds, the middle game, the end game, running around the ring and holding the opponent's arms.
That's a very good tweet. Yeah.
That is very, very nice. And Daniel Nolan actually transfers the question back to us and says, I'm definitely a positional player. Any tips on becoming more attacking?
Play sharper openings.
Look through the games of Simon Williams.
Wow,
Yeah, also play the King's Indian, get the lifetime repertoires.
Yeah. But it is. I mean, if you want to sharpen up your game, and one thing I find again, like let's say take the English chess scene, a lot of players who've been playing for like 20, 30 years, but they're not improving. They're all around like 2100, and I don't understand what they're doing because they play the same openings, the same setups. They're not getting better. So you've got to change things up. And if you're playing the same setups, it's a really good idea to suddenly change and play some really sharp stuff. You might lose a lot of games, but you just got to try to do something different. And picking sharper openings will give you a sharper game. As simple as that.
And that's the thing. I mean, that's a great tweet, great question, but it also depends what your goals are. If your goals are to become the most effective player, it's all about results, then embrace your style. Just look for top players who have your style, choose openings that kind of complement that. But yeah, if you're playing for enjoyment, just want to attack, want to change things up, for the sake of changing things up, then yeah, switch the openings, definitely play through the games of attacking players. But
will the H pawn move now? Sorry,
yes.
This is another little idea that we talked about in the Chessable course, Best of British. And one thing I think is very important for chess courses is not just talk about the opening moves, but talk about some standard ideas that you should try in the middle game. And this idea, it might look strange, but whenever your opponent has a fee and chateaued pawn, as Black has here, you can try attacking that, especially when you've got more pressure on that side of the board. So the idea of pushing the H-pawn is a good idea. And funnily enough, White's queenside is pretty solid over there. It's very hard for Black to do anything. I know White doesn't have great development.
Well,
he's gone the other way.
I wish I'd had a moment to say this because I was 100% sure. It wasn't even a question in my mind that Magnus would push this pawn. It's just a Magnus move. He does this all the time, and he loves his rook lifts. I commentated on the candidates with him last year, and every possible position, even if it made no sense, he would want to lift up his rook and slide it across. Not even to attack, just for positional purposes.
I love that, actually. I'm learning something as well from watching this because I'm only looking at the king, but this idea, it looks very nice.
I think he's going to try and combine it later on. I think it's also very clever that you waited for this kind of signal, this trigger, that the Black Knight retreated away from the Black King, and then you want to launch your pawn forward. I think that's definitely viable. But what Magnus is doing, really instructive, actually, because this White rook in the corner, just 2 moves ago, look at it. It's boxed in, it's stuck, it's got nowhere to go. Suddenly, push a pawn. Push this pawn forward, Black blocks, and lifting the rook up. Suddenly the rook has an easy path to an outpost, actually. If it gets to this b5 square, then it's going to be a glorious piece. So Vidit trying to stop that, but now the Black Knight is getting in the way, if anything.
And now it's completely offside. It's never going to go to the king's side or the right side of the board. So
Simon, is it now time?
Is it now or never?
I mean, it makes a lot of sense to concentrate on that area of the board because, Black's only got the bishop defending and you've already got the other white pawns. You don't need to rush pushing those pawns. You can do, but why not try to soften up Black's position as much as you can first? And this typical idea, putting that pawn on that square and then putting the queen behind it again at the right moment can be very dangerous. Maybe with a rook swinging around later on.
Yeah, for example, if Black just kind of sits and does nothing, bring the queen forward. And the other plan you mentioned, Simon, lifting both the rooks up the board. This rook's already lifted to the 3rd rank. Now you lift this one up and across, and you try and break through towards the Black King. Very tempting, very logical.
Yeah. And what about my favourite thing in the world, David? It is very, very visual, If there's a pawn on the h4, maybe there should be 4 pawns on the 4th row.
OK, so rather than pushing forward, I'm not sure what this pawn is doing, apart from getting in the way for White and weakening White's king, but it looks visual. It's very aesthetic.
I was thinking maybe Freddie can come forward.
Push them all. Why not? Get them all rolling up the board. So it looks pretty scary, doesn't it?
Kaya calls this the mean girls.
The mean girls.
The girl gang.
Yeah.
I think we should say Kaya, she's on a bachelorette party. Is that right? Did I realize say that? I hope.
I'm not sure she wants us to say that.
Oh,
yeah.
no, maybe a bit late.
Celebrating her friend's upcoming marriage.
Well, OK, too late now, sorry.
So, yeah, this is the move we're expecting. One of these mean girls maybe to push forward, this pawn. Another one, very logical one, would be this pawn. It looks like you're giving away some dark squares, but you do open up your bishop. You do also tie down black's rook, because one of the ideas for black might be to swing the rook across. Now, if the rook swings across, you can actually open up a file for your queen and rook. So, yeah, I'm expecting definitely, if we go back, one of these pawns to push. I don't think this one yet, but either this one, one square, and then up the board, or maybe...
Maybe the F-pawn is also very good. The F-pawn makes a lot of sense if you can get the bishop into the game and, try to attack like that. But Magnus having a big think here. We saw yesterday he did a similar thing. He had a very long think when he was playing, I think, Sam Shanklin, and he came up with a really clever idea, didn't he? I think it was Queen G4 in that game and after that he won very easily.
He did nothing. He did a nothing move that seemed to get under Sam Shanklin's skin, and then suddenly Sam Shanklin tried to punish that move, and it was just terrible because he'd created weaknesses and problems for himself. So
provocation, and I mean at all levels. I noticed I gained 100, 200 points when I realised doing nothing is actually, I think, half the time the best idea in chess. You provoke your opponent to make blunders. I don't win my games because I play flashy moves. I can't remember any flashy moves I play. I just provoke the mistakes, and that's what Magnus is so good at.
Yeah. I mean, there's not many other plans as well that I can see that white can do here. You can't really play on the queen side. You can't move many of your pieces over there. The bishops, they can't really go anywhere. So you have to really try to play on the king side, I think, here. This is the only area of the board. I mean, what other plans can you do? I'm
just wondering, guys, Magnus's webcam has disappeared. We haven't seen any live shots of him for a few minutes. And now he's been thinking for nearly 4 minutes. Is he disconnected? Is Magnus connected to the game? Big question. Is it?
I believe that Magnus was disconnected from the webcam because he had such a blurry image. I'm not quite sure, but he was having trouble with his streaming for a while there.
OK, so he is thinking he's not actually disconnected from the game, but 4 minutes thought on this position. Like Simon says, you have to push one of the pawns. There's not much else to do.
Yeah. What can black do now? I mean, we talked about white's plans here. I mean, is there anything you can see that black can do to create some threats? Obviously, when you're playing chess, if you want to improve your position, but you want to create some nuisance for your opponent. Can the black knight maybe reroute itself? OK, he's gone for the more full frontal attack there.
Yeah, and Simon, you mentioned black's plans. I was about to suggest this one. Black's queen slides across one square. I think the simple plan is to get greedy, go and grab a pawn. Black's knight and queen both looking at white's A pawn. I'm not really sure that's a relevant pawn. It costs black a lot of time to go and take it, but black's knight, if it does capture the white pawn on A4, then it does get offside. It will at least force Magnus to try and initiate some play. He can't just take all the time in the world now if he's about to go down a pawn. So, yeah, Vidit creating threats and maybe a small trap in the position as well that I've just spotted. So if we do jump in, white did push this pawn forward, black's queen sliding across, as we mentioned, eyeing up this pawn, and Magnus moves his bishop. If he defended this pawn, I think a big mistake, not just strategically here, blocking in his own rook, but tactically, because suddenly, which pieces are undefended for white? This one. And how many pieces are lined up against it? It's quite a lot. So black could actually play knight takes pawn, attacking the queen, and if the pawn recaptures, then this bishop at the bottom of the board falls, also attacking this rook. So that's one. Don't get greedy. Don't just protect pawns. Don't forget about your loose pieces. Magnus, of course, doesn't forget about them, and instead of pushing this pawn, which would be a losing blunder, he brings his bishop out and counterattacking against this weakness.
I'm surprised by that move, actually, for the primary reason that if black were to take the pawn, that's up for grabs. Suddenly the B2 pawn looks a little bit vulnerable, and if the knight gets to that square, then it can target the defender of the C2 pawn.
Yeah, and it's like dominoes here. For example, Jovanka, if you're right, if, for example, even if, I don't know, just to show the white pawn steps forward, if black can eliminate this defender actually holds together all of white's pawns. Imagine this bishop, if it drops, then the pawn next to it will drop, then the pawn next to it will drop, and so on. This is like a chain. They all connect. They all defend each other.
It's a little bit worrying for Magnus, actually, this position. I mean, I know I was getting very excited, but black has played it very well, I think, and he's managed to create this counterplay, and he's doing stuff on the queen side now. So you've got to you've got to find a way to deal with it. I don't know how.
I don't really like what he's done at all.
If you play bishop takes pawn, it's easily blocked. Black just pushes a pawn, hits your bishop, and next move, this b2 pawn will drop. So yeah.
It's not going to be a very good sales pitch, is it, for the course if he loses with it? You know.
Yeah, but he didn't play it according to you.
He didn't, no, but no one cares. You know, when they look at it, they're like, you know, and this is one thing you find actually a lot in chess databases, that people only look at the results. They don't look at the position. So even if someone's completely winning out the opening, if they blunder later on, you know, no one cares about the opening.
Really interesting move there from Magnus, because we talked about en passant earlier today. Sometimes I know a lot of players as well, we just forget about moves if they allow en passant, and this one wasn't even on my radar, I've got to admit. I've got to say, this pawn push allowing black to play en passant, the whole idea is that white's bishop at the bottom of the board, the white light squared bishop on d1 is attacking black's knight now, so maybe there's no time for black to do anything. Vidit is confused. I'm confused. There's so many options for black. But what creativity from Magnus, and we have to jump back in because this pawn push, so unexpected. We were all looking at this pawn or maybe the king's side, but Magnus pushing this guy forward has unleashed this discovered attack. And en passant here may be possible, but it does allow bishop takes knight, and at least temporarily, white would win a piece, attacking the black queen in the process. I mean, this is still super complicated. Black can counterattack by pushing his pawn. Black's down a piece, but he's attacking two bishops at the same time. Maybe he'll win his piece back. It's complicated, but if he doesn't play this, for example, and I was about to say, if he jumps forward with his knight taking this pawn, then there's a risk this knight gets trapped behind enemy lines. White's bishop now, under fire, is about to move. I'm not sure exactly where. But next turn, white will try and trap this knight. Maybe it can just run back, though. Maybe the knight does have an escape route back at the side of the board.
Maybe you should keep an eye on that escape square.
So going back, maybe this square feels a bit shaky, though, somehow.
It does. I was wondering whether black could kind of get creative and actually start sacrificing the knight.
Black can give up a knight for a bunch of pawns, but instead Magnus has gone in an opposite direction. He brought his bishop this way and actually indirectly trying to attack the queen. So, for example, now if black does try and evacuate the knight from no man's land, then suddenly white's pawn will step forward. This is an attack against the queen, and wow, it's really livening up now. Black is throwing everything at white's pawn chain, trying to trade off pawns here, but again, question is, what happens if white pushes forward, maybe, with his pawn in the centre, attacking the queen? Or what happens if white takes this pawn with his bishop, attacking the rook, attacking the knight? Chaos. And, I mean, the evaluation bar says it's all going in Magnus's favour. That means there's a strong move right now, but so much choice. And only 5 minutes to choose. Not easy. OK, he does take this pawn, double attack. Remember, attacking this knight and attacking the rook with your bishop. Maybe it's just very...
Yeah, I'm quite surprised, especially Vidit has been moving so quickly over the last couple of moves, because I think the last couple of moves was maybe the critical position somewhere for the whole game. And if he's just moved into a very bad situation, then very bad time management on his hands, because it was so many other options that Vidit could have tried. And I'm struggling to see what he plays here. I mean, he's got two pieces attacked. There's a problem.
I think he just missed this move.
I mean, he should have moved slower then. It's not such a hard move to miss. You know, it's like, you know, you take a pawn with your bishop. I mean,
look at his camera. I mean, he was shaking his head. He leaned back and frowned. Yeah, he's quite cool and calm and collected, Vidit.
Yeah, it's very strange. Very strange, the speed he was moving, I think.
Also, it's quite uncharacteristic because he does struggle in endgames, very simple positions. Vidit, I think his feel is maybe not quite as good as some of the top players like Magnus, but tactically, normally he can hold his own against these types of players. Normally he's very good at calculation.
Is there a way to kind of maintain that knight? So the first move that I'm thinking is, OK, first of all, you can't do any defence, so that means counter-attack. Maybe attack the rook, you know, jettison the b-pawn. OK, so in the current position, it's a double attack, as we mentioned. Black's rook and knight both under fire, so counter-attack. Push this pawn forward, attacking the white rook. But what if the white rook moves, for example? Actually, maybe you're right, Jovanka. The white rook, if it moves back, then suddenly the black knight can come out, gaining time in the process against the white queen. So maybe this pawn just has to be removed. Maybe it has to be captured. Yeah.
It's a very nice position.
The
though,
knight
isn't
is
it?
out, and still, you know, the operation was a success, but the patient still died. You know, it looks terrible.
Yeah, certainly. And there's also a real problem with this e-pawn in the centre of white's moving and just going for the kingside attack at the right moment. This could be really strong, combined with the f-pawn moving even.
I mean, for example, I'm not sure how to show it because black has too many pieces to defend. For example, if you just move your rook, but yeah, there's always going to be ideas of opening up this discovered attack against the queen. And Vidit decides it's desperate times, desperate measures are called for. And just to go back a couple of moves here, after the white bishop leapt forward, black's knight under attack. We've been highlighting it a few times, so it gave itself up. You might as well, if you're about to lose a piece, give it up for as many pawns as possible. And after the white rook took this knight, suddenly at least black has a few scary pawns for Magnus to deal with. And okay, lots of choice. Do you move your rook away from the attack, or do you just snack on this black rook first? You could just capture this black rook. We could see a really weird pawn structure. That's been the theme of today. And then you could run away with your bishop now and what do we call these? Tripled pawns?
Drunk pawns,
Drunken
Irish pawns.
The Irish pawns, I think, is their, official name, actually. So, yeah, but...
And interesting material imbalance here because the evaluation bar says Magnus is got a big advantage. But, OK, yes, he's got an extra bishop, but these 3 pawns, they are kind of compensation. Maybe it's just that they can't push forward. So a bishop and 3 pawns worth roughly the same, but maybe the bishop is superior here.
Just looks completely winning to white
To me, it looks totally winning.
Put the bishop back in front of the pawns and do some
enjoy.
I mean, I don't know. I can't see how black can survive that position. But
so Magnus has this
look
option.
at this. So he's gone for a a really crazy move there.
Oh,
How is this on his radar? This is why the top players are so good, because we were all looking at this rook or maybe running away from the attack, white's rook under fire, but Magnus has ignored both of those ideas and pushed forward. And he's hoping, for example, that black takes this pawn with his bishop, because now it's a double attack. We mentioned this attack against the queen, discovered threat, and now the black bishop will drop off next move. But, I mean, so much to calculate. We have the drunken pawns, the 3 pawns in the middle of the board, and not just that, we have a double agent, white's pawn taking a bishop, but actually keeping the black king pretty safe. White's pawn maybe doesn't even want to be there. And 2 black rooks under attack. Let's go back to the players. It's just complete chaos right now. And...
is this a little bit about that mania we were talking about earlier?
It's
good mania?
It's good mania for someone. I'm not sure who. I think Vidit, he kind of found himself in a situation he had to just let loose and just had to make it chaotic and wild, the position. But Magnus, okay, taking this pawn, surprising.
it's
but,
very surprising
all the
because
black
now you
pawns are
can
dropping.
go queen takes pawn check.
Maybe it's just too hot at his place because I'm looking at, here we see Vidit has 29 degrees at home, but Magnus has 25 degrees with the earthings. I think they're blowing off some steam right now.
Definitely. And we do know that Magnus likes his rooms very, very warm when he plays, often 25, 26 degrees. And in Norway, that's almost a record. But, OK, the current position, it has finally become less wild. It's clarified a bit. White has an extra bishop, but black has 2 pawns in return. It's all about whether black can hold off the white army and just create a fortress, maybe a blockade on the dark squares, but it feels like a distant dream at this moment.
I mean, the problem is that white simply has 1 extra piece to attack, and the main target is actually that pawn sitting on a light square, the f7 pawn.
Yeah. So, for example, if white's bishop, which doesn't look great right now, if it does reroute, we could see that happen right now. Magnus retreating the white bishop, and say we get a... Sorry about that, guys. Say we get a situation like this, the white bishop and the white rook will be attacking some pawns, and as Jovanka said, white has an extra piece with which to attack, and black's pawns are going nowhere. Black's 2 pawns... OK, this exact manoeuvre has happened on the board. Also very logical. The black pawns are just targets, if anything.
Yeah, I don't see Vidit saving this one. I mean, he's got 2 pawns for the bishop. I mean, luckily, Vidit has pawns in 1 bunch, which is actually good because all the pawns can guard each other, which is very, very, very useful for some defence. But I think Magnus's piece is going to swing round. He can swap queens at any moment. I would have thought Magnus just going into an ending where he'll be a piece up as well. And well, Vidit's going to have to do an amazing defensive job here to hold this position.
Yeah. But one thing I do have to say is actually, if Vidit were to exchange off rooks, it's not that easy for the queen and bishop to combine on the dark squares, and so they will have to work their magic on the light squares. And again, if black is successful, then they have things like perpetual jacks in the air.
Yeah, I mean, you just keep the rooks on the board.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's always worth, when you're in these kind of situations, to just think which pieces is it worth exchanging and which pieces do I not exchange. And as white's kind of in control, because he has that pressure against that pawn that he's attacking with the bishop, I don't think he needs to worry about that. I mean, let's say you move the rook, attack the pawn, swap the queens off. It's got to be winning, surely.
Yeah, swapping the queens off, I don't think is that.
Okay, so he's moving the bishop back now. So I think what he said, and this is typical Magnus, I would not play this move, but what he said is, I've created a weakness in front of the white queen because you can't defend that pawn with another pawn now. So I'm just going to move my bishop back and attack that weakness with my rook. I mean, it's really delicate and nice manoeuvring there. Very, very nice play. And I don't see how that pawn may just drop the black pawn, and then he's only got one pawn for the piece. That can't be enough. Okay, all right.
Okay, first he's attacking the black f7 pawn next to the black king. Black has to defend that with his rook. What is Magnus doing with his bishop? I'm trying to figure it out.
I thought his bishop was going to go to that square where the queen's gone. That made a lot of sense. Then activate the rook, but
could be in for quite a long game here. I mean, I'm less pessimistic about black's chances. Maybe I do think there's some drawing chances. Black's queen is just so strong, and if the queens do come off, white is running out of pawns. I mean, it should be winning for white, of course, with best play, but a long way to go. What is Vidit thinking about, though? He has to just use his rook and defend his pawns. The black queen can't defend the f7 pawn. You don't want to touch your own pawns near your king. You don't want to weaken the black king any further.
And does black kind of huddle into a shell and put the rook next to the king, or should the rook maybe keep its line and move to the a7 square, where it could be loose, Yeah.
I know it always matters, but how much does it matter right now with the 5 minutes versus 1 minute on the time clock?
Matters a lot. Yeah.
I think at some point it's going to become a real problem. I mean, maybe not now because it's not so complicated, but at some point things always get complicated, and that's when you need to have that extra time.
There will be a moment where Magnus sets a trap or kind of forces Vidit to calculate, and having less than a minute, it's going to be tricky for him to deal with that. It's going to be tricky for him to handle. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm still trying to work out Magnus's plan, though. Maybe he's just doing a little bit of manoeuvring around for the time being until he works out the way to go forwards. I mean, it's not as easy as I first thought. You've got to try to attack some weaknesses, but the only real weakness, there's two weaknesses in black's position, but they're both well defended. Both can be defended by the rook here.
Yeah.
So it's not that straightforward. Do you exchange queens, Jovanka?
Well, somehow or other, I do feel that maybe Magnus can have some fun before taking a committal decision of like exchanging queens or exchanging any pieces whatsoever. I'm just thinking, maybe white needs to start to activate the rook and put it on the B line, and then the rook and the bishop can start harassing the queen from the 5th row.
Yeah, and maybe even bring the rook down to the 7th as well.
Yeah.
You could try, couldn't you?
Could try, right?
I mean, it's a really good strategy that when you are trying to win, before you make a very committal decision, like exchanging queens, you try everything else you can, even if you can kind of realise that those tries are not going to result in really attaining any goal. You just put your opponent under little different bits of pressure if it doesn't worsen your position. So I like that. Yeah, there's no rush to exchange queens.
Okay, guys, I think it's time to make a prediction here. Do we think white's going to win?
As it's Magnus, and I think the position should be winning, yes. I'm going to go yes.
Yes.
That was better.
Sarah.
If I get to voice an opinion as well, I'm excited just to be able to voice it. But I always enjoy a good battle here. I'm hoping for a good finish where Vidit can actually put up some counterplay and we can have an enjoyable late game. That was a really boring answer, wasn't it?
No, I mean, boring, but
No, I think David might be. Are you going to go the same?
I was going to give a similarly boring answer. So you stole the words out of my mouth.
So it's 2-2. 2-2.
Okay.
We got 2-2. Yeah.
And we all think okay, rook coming up to the 7th rank. Okay, I think this one's going to be winning for Magnus sooner or later, but I was going to say, I think it's going to be quite a long game still, so how many moves? That's the
How many moves? Oh.
I'm going to say 100 just because I'm a sadist.
Oh, you love 100.
But it's 38 moves
Move
already. You know,
38,
it feels like they've played like 50 moves, but they haven't.
Okay, I'll go 80. I'll go, yeah,
It's going to be a long one. We're going to have to dig deep.
It's definitely going to depend upon Vidit, because we know that Magnus is not going to stop pushing here regardless. So
So what moves have we got? Okay, so we've got 180.
No, I'm going to say lower than that, actually.
Okay.
I'm going to say...
Ooh, especially after this last move.
Yeah, after this last move, exactly.
Oh, you're getting more information. Every move, it changes quite a bit.
Well, you declared your intentions too early,
Come on,
Simon.
hurry up, get you moving.
Let's see how Vidit responds.
No, you can't just drag it out. You've got to decide. Yeah.
OK, 70.
Okay.
I was saying I was hoping for good counterplay. I don't know if I necessarily believe in good counterplay, so I'm going to say 61.
See, if you went 69, you cover all those numbers. So, but 61's a good bet, I think, as well, actually. So
I think you're going to be closest, probably, because this last move by Magnus, it has changed things. I thought, OK, the queens were going to come off. The black pieces would be able to fight off the white army for a long time with those 2 extra pawns, but suddenly white is about to win one of those pawns.
And can I just push in here? Gawain Jones has won his first match, and his or first game, rather. They're not playing matches here, but he's won it against one of the guys in top, David Anton.
brilliant.
Oh,
very good.
Fantastic.
Rule Britannia.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Because
Yeah.
I mean, it's horrible when you're having a horrible tournament. It just feels like gold, doesn't it? When
Yeah.
you get a win, it's like, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah.
You know.
And often, sometimes it can be just what you needed,
Yeah.
and it can be enough to kind of launch a few other victories. And
I did also see some stats by Ty, our numbers guy, just before today, and David Anton had 96% chance of qualifying for the knockouts. So, yeah, we're celebrating Gawain, but
Yeah.
I'm sure David Anton, he's had a great tournament. I'm sure he'll still do well.
But I heard you say yesterday, Simon, that once Gawain wins a game here, he's gonna roll. He's gonna get into a rhythm.
Yeah, I think so. Like Ivanka mentioned, you kind of need that sort of just. It's really quite an emotional game, chess. Like a lot of things, it's confidence. You get that first win, and the way that Gawain plays, it can just lift him to calculate better. So so we might see, I hope, many more wins from Gawain in the next rounds. So,
Next round is black against Ding Liren, so that's going to be interesting then.
Okay, that's a tough one. All right, yeah.
He'll play the King's Indian, which he's done a chessable course on, so his speciality, maybe.
And the signs are aligning. The prize for the quiz of the day is Gawain Jones' lifetime repertoire on the
Yes.
King's Indian.
It is a really good course. I mean, I know I have to really say that. I can't say it's rubbish, but it is actually a really good course. I mean, all the chessable courses are great because they're checked so thoroughly, and I know that because the amount of checking my courses have been through, it's intense. So they're all great, but Gawain's course is special. He gives that great opening, great justice.
17 seconds for Vidit. The clock is ticking down. He needs to make a move. What is he going to play?
Clock is also
There's-
ticking down to move 61.
Yeah. Oh, and Magnus.
5 seconds, and there's a pawn up for grabs. He needs to defend that pawn. But then
Does
this-
that defend it?
No, he can't do that. Yeah.
So he's lost a pawn and the queens have come off. Now it's 4 versus 3 on one side of the board. This one is winning for white. Still, if all the pawns disappear, then rook and bishop versus rook is technically a draw. So Vidit now, he does have some small, tiny glimmer of hope.
But look how happy Magnus is. He's got that big smile on his face. He's clearly very excited about how the game's going here. So, I mean, it's a good picture, isn't it?
I mean, being surrounded by this great British humor is one of the best places I could have been right now.
I love that comment, Simon.
Well, yeah.
You always
He
make
looks
me laugh.
happy.
OK, so what is the winning plan for white? And how long will it take? Because we're closing on a move 61.
So
He said 61. Sfera said 61.
Yeah,
and what did you say, David?
I said 100, just for the sake of it.
You went 70, I went 80.
yeah.
Okay, right.
Okay, we're looking good, Simon.
Yeah, I think we're getting nearer to I don't know. I mean, maybe you have to push one of the pawns. You don't really want to exchange pawns off here, but I think maybe like an F-pawn push, move the king in.
Could you not have some fun with the bishop first? Improve that one to the maximum?
So this bishop can be improved, and also all of black's pawns lie on light squares. So you want to attack the base of black's pawn chain. That's this pawn. This pawn is not protected by any other pawn. So at some point, you would love to kind of get a scenario where you bring your rook up. And for example, if black just waits and does nothing, somehow you want to bring your bishop around. And OK, I'm just kind of being a bit helpful here for black. But if you can get a situation like this where the bishop and rook gang up against the base of the black pawn chain, then the rest of the position collapses for black. All of the pawns disappear. But yeah, maybe Vidit can fend off this type of idea. For example, in a situation like this, he can always bring his rook back and stop the white bishop from infiltrating.
He's gone for the F5 move.
He's gone for a pawn push. Wow, OK. Really interesting by Magnus. Instead of going the long way around with the bishop, which I was hoping for, to get to move 100, he's pushed this pawn forward. It's edible in two different ways. If you take this way, as black, your pawn in the corner drops. Suddenly white gets Harry the H-pawn, another theme of the day. And yeah, suddenly you're breaking through to this weakness as well. So that looks terminal. But also, if you play pawn takes pawn, then suddenly the white rook is going to come up to the 7th rank. And it's, yes, you've given up one pawn for white, but there's two big threats in the position. Firstly, white is threatening to bring the bishop to the centre, attacking this pawn, but also attacking this rook in the corner. And a secondary threat, for example, if black stops that, is that the white pawn is pushing forward and breaking through thanks to the 7th rank pin. I think Magnus has found the moment. And let's go back to Vidit, because 5 seconds now.
It could be move 61. It could be. You know, it's sort of that H-pawn is going to surely just win the day now. I mean,
8 seconds.
Now you've created
5
a pass pawn.
seconds.
That's the dream.
Yeah, black has to huddle up. No, not in. Does this one work?
He wants to trade a set of pawns, but it looks like the white rook can go up to the 7th rank with a check, maybe.
I mean, can you just... Is that a winning rook and pawn ending even? Often you can...
Yeah.
Often you can give up material to get into an ending that you know is winning, and it looks very close to being winning with the white king. I'm just thinking of a variation here. I mean, we're probably going to see a move on the board anyway, but a key line is the rook checks the king. The king has to go away from defence of the pawn.
You have to go to attack the bishop.
Only square, and you have to now calculate pawn takes pawn because it's a very concrete and forcing variation. Black has to take the bishop. You push the pawn on, creating another big threat. Only one defence. The rook comes back, and I was wondering now if you're in time to move your king in here, which is very close to winning.
Yes.
But I'm not sure if it's... If this wins, you play it. So this is why Magnus...
Maybe black can hold by the king going back and just blocking this square.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe just in time, but you're right, Simon. This is exactly what Magnus is calculating right now. Magnus would love to just take this pawn, create a pass pawn of his own, but maybe he's not in time. Maybe he needs to save his bishop first. And there we go. He does save his bishop. At least now black gets this kind of cluster of pawns. These three, yes, some of them will drop after white's last move, dropping the rook back, pinning and winning this pawn. But if now Vidit can trade off the rook somehow, it's a distant dream, but if he can kind of make the rooks disappear from the board, even if he loses these 3 pawns, if you're all the highlighted pieces now, if they all drop off the board, it's actually a draw, because a white bishop on light squares alone and a pawn that promotes on dark squares cannot win. Black's king will just go and hide in the corner, and there's no way to evict it. So some hope for Vidit?
Yeah,
maybe.
Definitely some hope. I have to confess, I actually had this endgame with the rooks, and black didn't have any pawns, and it took me forever to win it, because, you know, black kept offering a trade of rooks. There were stalemating opportunities for black, and I just had to be so careful.
Even without these 2 pawns, it's not easy, right?
Not an easy win.
Yeah, and,
maybe the pawns kind of help white in some ways. You often get that in these endings that black wants to keep checking the white king, but sometimes the pawns get in the way. So, you know, of checks towards the white king, which you could see potentially here in some cases.
For example, now I think a simple winning plan for white is just bring the bishop forward, pushing this pawn at the right time, and there we go. Magnus is about to maybe win 1 pawn and then push his own pawn simultaneously. It looks like he's getting closer, and there we go. We're going to get the exact endgame you mentioned there, Jovanka. All of the black pawns are about to drop off if we rush forward to the current position.
Move 63. So it's closing in on 71.
Yeah.
But
I'm at 70, right?
Oh, 70. 60. So 61 is gone, yeah.
61 is gone.
Yep.
OK, 61 is gone.
You're 70 and I'm 80, so OK.
Could see some sturdy defence maybe from Vidit. Up to maybe 100.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, you know, I made a meal of it. And the thing was that people were waiting for me as well. And they were like, yeah, she's going to win.
Okay.
Within 5 moves. And then like 40 moves later, I was still at it.
Wow. Just tossing it out there, it's so far out of the 5 games we see here, it's all decided. It's also Ariantari who wins against Van Forest, which is pretty big in the scheme of things.
Yeah. And how did Eric Hansen? Sorry, I'm just having a look because obviously Eric was bouncing back, wasn't he, into the tournament?
Yeah, he's still playing.
Still playing, okay, right.
Oh, really tense game there against Prague, maybe fizzling out to a draw. Meanwhile, Magnus, he's forced the Black King out of the corner. That's the first step. Now the Black King not blockading in the dark square in the corner.
I think it's move 68. I mean, resigning here would not be a bad option, I feel. You're playing Magnus Carlsen, I mean, like, you know, no.
It's almost stalemate, though. If the black rook wasn't on the board, it would be a draw and stalemate. But the problem is you can't give up your black rook. And, I mean, you can't force white to take your black rook. And I think we're about to see Vidit. Has he just resigned?
He has just resigned. Move 68.
Well done. So 69 would have been a great answer there. But 68, yeah.
And, yeah, Magnus showing his class, taking the endgame win.